Bloodline classes have been fully revealed, well, almost fully revealed because there's still one remaining, which looks like it's going to be Breach themed, but last night a further 6 of the Bloodline classes were fully unveiled. And overall, I think Bloodlines are quite good. There's definitely quite a bit of inconsistency in terms of the power level of nodes across the different options that are available, but do keep in mind that these Bloodline class notables are not necessarily competing with the strongest normal Ascendancy nodes in terms of power level, but rather they are competing with your 3rd or 4th best option on the Ascendancies. Because most Ascendancies have 2 or 3 great notables for particular builds, some have 4, but for those builds that are lacking a good 3rd or 4th choice, that's where these Bloodline classes come into play and provide more options to build around. Now, one of the revealed Bloodlines is the Delirious Bloodline, and this one is presumably accessed by completing the final wave of Simulacrum. And in this video, I want to discuss one new notable in particular, because this one is crazy. Schizophrenic Dissociation. Take 40% less damage from hits, 4 seconds after each hit you take, lose life equal to 40% of the damage taken from that hit. And non-cluster jewels socketed in your passive skill tree have no effect. Okay, before we talk about what the node actually does, the downside must be addressed, because this might be one of the most punishing downsides on any notable or keystone or item in Path of Exile. And there's 2 interpretations of this modifier. The first one is that you cannot gain bonuses from any non-cluster jewels anywhere in your tree. So rare jewels like Viridians, or Abyss jewels, or uniques like Timeless jewels or Watcher's Eye, none of them will provide any bonuses no matter where they are socketed in your tree, whether that's in a normal tree socket or an outer socket or a cluster socket. That's the first interpretation of this modifier, and that's also the one that the majority seem to think is true from what I've seen. But the second interpretation, that a much smaller amount of people have been suggesting, is that you can gain the bonuses from these non-cluster jewels, but only if they're socketed in a cluster jewel socket, because that's technically not part of the passive skill tree. Now personally, I believe the first interpretation is going to be the one that's actually true in game, but hopefully we'll get confirmation on this in some kind of FAQ, which I think they'll do soon because a lot of people are asking a lot of different questions about some of the other nodes too. But to be clear, this is a giant downside if it does indeed work this way. Very useful unique jewels in Path of Exile have become more and more aplenty over the years, and by now most builds use at least 1 unique jewel, but more likely 3 or 4 or more across their entire passive tree. So not gaining any bonuses from those jewels is going to be build breaking for some setups. But one thing to note here is SSF, where access to some of the more powerful unique jewels is much more limited. This node has a bit more potential in those cases where the trade-off is potentially less significant. Okay, so what does this node actually do? When you take a hit of damage, that damage will be lessened by 40%. So let's take a basic example. You receive a hit of 1000 damage, 40% is mitigated, so you take 600 damage. Then, 4 seconds after the hit, you lose life equal to 40% of the damage taken from that hit. So 40% of 600. You lose 240 life instantly after 4 seconds. Something to note here is that this portion of the notable is specifically life loss, it isn't damage. When the hit takes place, you take the damage, and this is the only time that you actually take damage with regards to any mechanics that relate to taking damage, such as cast when damage taken, or guard or Aegis skills. Then, 4 seconds later, you lose a portion of life, and the life loss does not count as being hit, and it will not count towards any damage counters like cast when damage taken. It also cannot be redirected to any other resource like Molten Shell or Energy Shield. It will always be lost wholly from your life pool. And perhaps most important of all, this portion of life loss cannot be modified in any way, and it can't be mitigated further. But even though this portion is life loss, it is still lethal. It will still kill you if it would bring your life to 0. And that means that this node cannot be used with Chaos Inoculation or extreme low life setups, because the life loss portion will forcibly be removed from your life pool, instantly killing you. Now, the most notable use case for this node is against one-shots, things like Uber Boss Slams and other abilities that can bring you from 100 to 0 instantly. This is because in those scenarios, you know what's dangerous and what's not, and it's very rarely going to be the case that you have a moment where there's something that can one-shot you, and then 4 seconds later you're in danger again. And if this node allows you to survive a hit that would have otherwise killed you, you're very unlikely to die as a result of the life loss component 4 seconds later after surviving that hit. 4 seconds is long enough of a period of time that you're able to easily recover and reposition, but it's typically not long enough for a boss slam to be ready again. Now, in the same vein, this node is also exceptional in terms of just generally difficult content like juiced up tier 17 maps, if you have good means of recovery. If you have a lot of regen or leech, for example, you can quickly recover from any bigger hits, and the comparatively much smaller portions of life loss will be completely trivialized. Alright, so let's discuss an interaction that's quite interesting. What happens when you combine Schizophrenic Dissociation with Petrified Blood? Petrified Blood says that when you're on low life, 40% of the life loss resulting from damage of incoming hits is prevented, then a percentage of that is lost over 4 seconds. Petrified Blood is not a form of damage mitigation, and it's calculated right at the end of the damage calculation, only once damage would actually cause life loss. And this is important because even though Petrified Blood prevents a portion of the life loss from occurring instantly, it doesn't actually change how much damage you take from a hit. It only modifies the life loss resulting from that damage. So let's say an incoming hit deals 1000 damage and you're on low life. Schizophrenic Dissociation lessens the damage by 40%, bringing it down to 600, and 240 life loss will occur in 4 seconds. Then a level 20 Petrified Blood with 20% quality prevents 40% of the immediate life loss, and 76% of that prevented life loss is lost over the following 4 seconds. Therefore, 360 life is lost immediately, and 182 is lost over 4 seconds. So in total, from a 1000 damage hit, the character lost 782 life, but is lost in 3 separate portions. The upfront portion of life loss, which is 360 after the less damage taken modifier and the 40% prevention from Petrified Blood. Then there's the delayed instant life loss from Schizophrenic Dissociation, which is 240 lost all at once after 4 seconds. And finally, the overtime life loss from Petrified Blood, which is 182, but that's lost over 4 seconds. You can see in this example that even though quite a lot of life is lost comparatively with the initial hit, and not that much was actually prevented, the separated portions of life loss make the damage potentially a lot easier to deal with, especially on a build with great recovery. Now, at the end of this video, I want to briefly discuss the potential of an interaction that may or may not be possible, and this all comes down to which interpretation of the downside line on Schizophrenic Dissociation ends up being true. But let's just say that it's somehow possible to use Dissolution of the Flesh and Schizophrenic Dissociation together. Well, these two combine exceptionally well together. That's because the 40% less damage taken from hits line will impact the amount of life that gets reserved when you take damage from hits, and then the life loss portion will be removed from your actual life and not reserved, which is how the life loss from Petrified Blood works with Dissolution. That would be an exceptionally powerful combo, because it would essentially result in actually just providing 40% less damage taken. But I don't want to go too deep into that topic because I don't believe it will be possible in 3.27, but we'll have to wait and see. Now overall, Schizophrenic Dissociation is an extremely strong defensive option to aid in mitigating one-shots, but it comes at a giant cost. A cost that is so high to the point that the majority of builds would likely prefer not to build around it. But if you do want to build around it, you'll probably be able to make some of the tankiest builds ever seen in Path of Exile in this upcoming league by combining this with other mechanics, and I look forward to seeing what people are going to come up with as a result. Thanks for watching this video, and as always, stay tuned and stay safe.